against rapes, and she's protecting them.
Yeah.
Because she loves rape, I guess. It's all part of God's plan.
Well, somebody said the other day, one of those fundamentalists, that in Israel, that if the soldiers decided to rape Palestinians, that's good. It would help their morale. That was an absolute quote. Are we on? I hope not.
This is Oh Say Can You See, the twice monthly program created by the Society for Economic Equality in order to discuss the issues that affect working people in West Michigan, in the country, and in the world. I'm here tonight with Jack Prince. This is April 17th. We'll be opening the phones for your phone calls. Jack Prince was with me last time. If you're a watcher of the show, you remember him. We discussed the train wreck that is the Betsy DeVos Department of Education. And quite a bit has happened since then. Where do you begin with Betsy DeVos? To begin with her alma mater being protected by her from allegations that it's not properly investigating sexual assaults on its campus? Well, let's get back to the basics. Last time we talked about a few things and about who Betsy DeVos is and why you should care about what she is planning to do to your public schools. If you haven't noticed, the DeVosses have been interested for 20 years in pushing voucher systems that would drain public money from public schools into charter schools, which would not have the same standards in terms of inclusivity or of separation of church and state. Last time we scratched the surface, and I want Jack to reopen some of those scabs for us here tonight. Now, Jack Prince is not of the Prince family, which gave us the dynamic duo of Eric Prince of Blackwater and Betsy DeVos of the Trump administration, but he is a Prince of a fellow, and as a former teacher and a official with crisis manager with the teachers union, he has a lot of knowledge about this, and if you pay attention, you will too. So Jack, please take the floor and give us the basics on Betsy DeVos, and then we'll get into our general conversation.
Well, thank you, Steve. You know, the name Prince, that reminds me of a story real briefly. Jeremy Scahill, who wrote the excellent Blackwater, appeared at a speaking engagement in Holland. And I just bought my book hours before we arrived at that engagement. And at the end of his speaking, he asked people to come up and said if anybody has my book called Blackwater, he'd be glad to sign it. So I approached the desk, and he said, "Hi, I'm Jeremy Scahill. What's your name?" And I said, "Jack Prince." I completely forgot that that was the nemesis. That was the very
Oh.
nucleus of Holland
Did
that
his-
he was writing
Did his
against.
face blanche?
Yeah,
You thought you were
he
there to break a
recoiled,
leg or two?
dug in. I said, no, believe me, no relation at all with that Prince family. I'm English, not Dutch, and I'm progressive. I'm not following the bumper stickers that said if you're not Dutch, you're not much. I look at it totally different. He's a man who understands the absolute inworkings of the Prince family and the DeVos family. It goes back generations. He tracked it there in Holland. If you go out on a winter's night to Holland, you'll notice the streets are all thawed out, because that is a Mr. Prince's work, not of my family, who decided it was too slippery for his wife to walk downtown Holland, talk to the city commission into heating the streets. Then wanted a restaurant for her to visit with her friends. That would be Betsy's mother. So they literally shipped over the Alpine Rose, which is on the corner of Main Street, and I forget the corner street, so she could have her lunch guests on Friday afternoons. That kind of control they'd like to have, not just in the city council at Holland, they'd like to have it within public schools. It's inherent in the family's ambitions. We see it with Eric, with the military.
Yeah.
This is indicative of a deep-seated belief that you must convert anything public onto private ownership. You have to, you're a historical buff. I've talked with Steve in the past, and his depth of understanding historically is impeccable. And he would recognize, I hope other people recognize, that authoritarian governments are bent on reducing the amount of input any person has into the control of their life, their government, their school district, any segment whatsoever. When the fascists went to war in Catalonia against the anarchists, back in Franco's period,
Sure, right, the
putting a lot of-
1936.
1936. There was a temporary victory for the anarchists. And the amount of responsibility they laid on people's shoulders, they were to be in control of their community, their neighborhood. The crime rates dropped. The spousal abuse disappeared. The people ran their world. It was an amazing time of tranquility. I know all the conservatives talk about the ideal utopia that the idealistic liberal dreams about. There was a utopia. Now let's fast forward that, where you take control of life out of individuals' hands and group communal control, and give it to the very few. You give it to those who think they're superior because they're richer than you, or because they have a religious affiliation, and they know what's best for education, and they want to take the control away from the public. That's been the trait of authoritarian societies. Who was it? Bush said it's a lot easier to be a dictator. Kissinger, I think, said that it's easier to kill 1 million people than it is to control them. They have trouble if people organize. They have trouble if they're in committees. They have trouble if they have common shared interest. So take that away.
Okay.
That means privatize it.
Right, privatization, that's what this is about. But I think we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves into the general issue when I think we want to focus on Betsy DeVos's 20-year plan in Michigan to promote charter schools at the expense of public schools. We know that in the 1990s, she was able to get it put onto the ballot, and Michigan's voters rejected the voucher program
yes,
that
they
she
did.
planned. We also know that since then, she's just never given up. And actually now she's in a position to bring that system to the entire country, whereas what she's already done in Michigan can be shown to be a failure.
Exactly. You know, the thing that she did in the failed campaign of her husband, when they pushed the vouchers,
When Dick DeVos tried to buy the governorship for
Spent the most
$100
money.
million or something,
Exactly.
and even that wasn't enough to make people vote for him. But
right. What she did in really traditional style of the DeVosses is to make front groups with different names.
Yes, that's what they do.
And then they spread those all over the United States and secretly fund them. They got caught in Ohio doing that, and were fined the biggest fine in Ohio's history, trying to influence elections by supporting anti-public school candidates. They knew they couldn't come right out and state up front that the voucher was the way they wanted to fund public education. So they became much more clandestine. And some of the nefarious ways that they operate, and I think you need to realize they have a whole vernacular where they use terms that sound like things that traditional public school advocates would believe in.
Right, they try to say things in a way that you will think, oh, well, that's something sounds good to me. Choice, well, choice is good, right?
Exactly.
But if
And
it
then
means
freedom, also put freedom of choice, freedom and
right.
school of choice.
But if it undermines the funding of the public schools, then what it's doing is using the idea of we're going to be charitable towards this student and that student, but we're going to ignore all these other students. Well, she's often been asked and never been able to answer when she says, we just want to make sure that there are these better schools for students to go to if they choose to. They say, well, why don't we fund the schools enough to make them better schools for everybody?
Exactly.
Jeremy Scahill, you mentioned the author who knows the Prince DeVos Kabul inside out. He's also the author of a book called The Family, unless I'm mistaken,
Yes.
which is about a cabal of dominionists who live together, Congress people who live together in a little right-wing commune, I guess you'd say. Well, they pray daily and they promote these types of programs. And I know that that the Vice President, Mike Pence, is a protege of the DeVosses, and that Betsy DeVos and her brother Eric Prince strongly urged Trump to choose Pence because he is of that handmaiden tale type of politician.
That's correct.
Who is looking for this, to take this control from people. As you were saying, we know that when women have control of their body and their finances, wherever that revolution has happened, social problems have improved. It's the number one thing you can do to improve the social conditions of any society is to empower women.
That's correct.
Whereas these reactionaries are not only wanting to disempower women, they want to disempower minorities, they want to disempower immigrants, obviously,
Right.
and anyone who doesn't agree with their religion, because at the base, and I know this sounds bizarre, and they don't come out and say it, but if you study their program, they are dominionists who believe that it is their duty to make the U.S. government a theocratic state.
That's correct, Steve.
So that it will be ready for when Jesus comes back,
Right.
and that Jesus won't come back until they take over the government and build him a throne
That's how
on
draconian
which
that
that
is.
Jesus
Right.
they're expecting will sit on.
Yeah, that's stage 5 of
Stage
privatization.
5 of, yeah.
Right. If we go back to stage 1,
Right, let's get back to
understanding
stage
now
1.
what their ultimate objective is.
Right.
It is
Let's-
to lose the
let's
control
go through
of
it
the public
step
control.
by
Right.
step.
The first steps, obviously, are to subvert the public funding. Okay.
Right.
Now, let's look at contemporary time. There was, and I don't know where this is at in the House, a bill that would allow corporations to get a tax write-off if and when they donate directly to the private school.
Public schools.
No,
Oh.
to the private school, to the charter school.
Oh, I see, to the charter school.
See,
which is,
when-
they confuse people by going, this is a public school, but not really.
Right. See, and I've looked at charts, and I wish I could pull it up right now. Back when I was in school, the amount of corporate money that was paid in taxes that went to the public schools, they don't want that. They want the corporations paying for schools that they're owning, that are devoid of public input, that has a business board, of which we have some right here in this city. The last time on the show, we mentioned some of them. The museum school
Might as
gets
well
much
get-
fanfare. That has a public business board. The Martin Luther King, or the college prep, university prep, that has a private board. Losing control step at a time, and it takes the robbing or the misdirection of funding from public money and corporate money for public schools.
Right, so
That's
that-
been broken. That's been shattered. The percent that corporations are paying today for a public school operation is a minuscule point or amount as compared to back in the 70s when I was in school.
So the privatization of schools or of the military or of any other legitimate function of government is being done not just to siphon off public money to the rich, but it's also being done to control what those programs will be. As with George Bush's compassionate conservatism, where they took public money and we're going to give this to the church. It's not bad enough that they're already tax-free. We're going to say, well, if we give public money to the churches, then they could do these social programs that before had been merely underfunded by the government itself.
Right.
And you know, while there have been minor successes with this sort of thing, the tendency is bad because it tends to discriminate, because when you have religious institutions running social programs, their religion is going to insinuate itself into what should otherwise be neutral, secular social programs
Right.
that can welcome everybody. They don't discriminate against you if you're a Muslim, or discriminate against
Right.
you if you're a Native American, for instance.
Correct.
That's,
See,
that's
there could be, and there should be, an elucidation of the fact that the subversion of the business money hasn't increased any academic achievement.
it's a bit of failure.
Yeah, it's been a-
Academically, it's
it's-
been a total failure.
So they've adapted a new way of doing that. Instead of a broad scope survey of academic success, they'll zero in or cherry pick a particular building or particular program. Of course, maybe the number one in this area is the Academy of Aviation, which is a cherry-picked academy right near the airport that the DeVos has started.
Yeah.
Now they're going to elucidate and flame their success, okay?
Yep.
And ignore the fact that we have literally scores of charter schools that have started up within the state and then completely dissolved in a matter of months.
Right, they're just gone.
I saw a map in the Detroit area, red flags all over the place. The federal government gives them money with the conservative influence. Sometimes they don't open the door. The doors are never opened in the school. The money is lost.
Where to
Billions
go?
of dollars now from sea to signing she that's just evaporated into the hands of managers of charter schools, billionaires that buy a building, then lease it back for crazy prices. Remember, we mentioned this the last time. The dream for any conservative is to use public monies so they can spend business money where they want, so they can get a focus on their so-called success, but then they also have $8,000 per student that they can get in taxpayer money. It's a scam of scams.
And an analogy to this is the financial crisis of 2008, where these guys want to take huge risks, and while that's paying off, it's theirs.
Right.
But when the risk causes the whole thing to collapse, they suddenly need to be bailed out to the tune of $2 trillion.
Right.
So the charter schools are in a situation like that, where for the charterer, it cannot fail,
Right.
because they will get paid back. They're getting paid up front. If they don't even open their doors, at least it's an success for them, because they got their hands on public money, and now it's in their private pockets, and they don't have to give it back.
Right.
And even the schools, the charter schools, which claim to be doing well by certain metrics, do that by refusing to take the very problem people that end up being underfunded in the public schools. It's like the raft of the Medusa, where the rich people all got to stay on the boat, and they put all the poor people on the raft and said, we'll drag you so that the boat doesn't sink. And then in the middle of the night, they just cut the raft loose.
Right.
That's where we're at right now.
Right. And now, if we are going to build our building blocks towards our ultimate objective, we start out with the cutting of funding, breaking the image of the public school, okay? Now we can take that to their next step. Their next step really is insidious, because now they are realizing that we can influence the political world with the same bribery money that we've used with the media, et cetera, et cetera. So we have a Democratic Party. I sit here as an independent. We have a Democratic Party who, back in Obama's reign, joined in wholeheartedly with the concept of charter schools.
Right,
had a
Arnie
secretary of
Duncan was
ed-
a cheerleader for charter schools.
for them. And up until recently, Steve, the Democratic Party, and for that matter, the unions, have been very, very quiet on confronting charter schools. Rob Emanuel, I think it was, that went to Chicago, the recipient, now they find of monies that came because he cut, I don't know, hundreds of public schools and replaced them with charter schools. There's huge money. Investors say it's the biggest untapped market. This was Silicon Valley. Well, get a sheet, folks. Put your computer on and type in what is the national amount of money that's spent on education from tax dollars. And these people are drooling because they want
They want to get their money on it. And there's money on in other directions for creating these awful curricula that paralyze any possible teaching that could go on in the school because the teachers have to teach to a test.
Right.
Rockford construction converting old schools into condominiums.
Right.
There's money leaking out of the public treasury in every direction. But let's not forget that they're not just thieves. They actually have a religious program that they intend to impose upon us.
That's right. Right.
So,
as we said earlier, it's like the final stage. We're going to break the system. We're going to put the politicians in our pocket, and we're just going to keep climbing. Now they're getting pretty bold, though.
Oh, they're
bold. If we can move up to the third or fourth stage, we see Betsy talking about cutting millions of dollars of all literacy programs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, to you and I,
cutting $7 billion out of the education budget, and money that she's leaving in, she says can be used by the schools to buy guns for teachers.
Right.
Even when the law says no, it can't. She says, oh, it can. Oh, sure it can.
You know, our reading levels are absolutely abysmal.
Oh, yeah.
The fast food companies know that all you have to do is put a picture of the menu on the board because they're not going to read it. They'll just look at the picture. I want a fry, I want an onion ring, I get it. I see the picture.
Well,
there's a book out called The Dumbest Generation that talks about just the ridiculous drop in our reading ability. And for you and I to hear Betsy talk about cutting literacy programs, we say, my God, that's the heart of learning. That's the very first step of being able to learn.
Yes.
What's been lost?
Right.
What's been lost is they think an education is a preparation for a career.
Right.
We thought an education was liberation of the mind and was an epiphany.
Right.
We still, in the 60s and the 70s, believed what the Europeans believed at one time, that education wasn't preparing somebody to put a thatched roof on a building. It was taking off the conventional blinders, the status quo understanding of everything, and replacing it with a personal freedom. And sometimes it took years, and a master would take a student one-on-one and decide when they had been liberated. Didn't give them one more frigging test with multiple choice questions.
Right.
There was a individual epiphany that this educational master observed. Hell, that's gone, Steve. That's long gone.
Well, that'll never be gone in terms of the spiritual level. There will always be seekers and there will always be teachers, and they will always find each other. But in a social context, the DeVosses have been at war with a liberationist form of education, at least since the 70s. There are two people in this room that I know of who were at Grand Valley when the older Rich DeVos got his cronies named to the board of control and gutted the public college because he was afraid and disgusted by the curriculum, which was student-based, where teachers formed curriculum with students. There's a great deal of questioning going on. And he took Grand Valley and turned it into the Ken and Barbie land we all know and loathe today. So the DeVosses are not new to this particular game.
No.
And as you said, with the Prince family in Holland, it really is about their religion and their ideas of reactionary social control and their ideas of reactionary patriotism.
Right.
And it has all come together in Betsy and Eric Prince. Betsy DeVos, the DeVos family merging with the Prince family into an unholy alliance of social control and military privatization. And while we're talking about the Prince family, you know Eric Prince just signed a multi-billion-dollar contract with the Chinese government to do paramilitary operations in Western China,
Right.
terrorizing the Uyghurs who are being incarcerated, and
That's right.
numbers perhaps 1 million people for their religious beliefs. Eric Prince, who hunted Muslims from helicopters at night in Iraq, you know, not insurgents, just
Right.
anybody who looks like an Iraqi.
Right.
He might have been shooting Christians. He wouldn't even know. But
I'm sure you're
he was
aware, Eric.
but he's shooting them for Jesus.
Eric was sued by a father who was driving his son to school and had
Yeah.
to sit 3 feet from him while the top of his head was blown off by soldiers, Blackwater soldiers, in
Yeah.
a famous square.
Right.
I wish we could go down that road right now, but I'd like to go back to the idea that you mentioned the religious pinnings of the family here in West Michigan and how that is slowly, at least they're attempting to infiltrate religious control in the public schools. Whether it's talking about abstinency as a birth control method, which I saw them try slipper and right in Grand Rapids public schools when I was a teacher, or it's the idea that you put great merit on obedience. You have to remember, these are people that take the verse that the beginning of understanding or the beginning of real knowledge is to fear God.
Well, they don't understand what that word was translated from. Could have easily been awe or anything, you know.
They'll try and tell you that it is, and yet we know, based on the amount of abuse that husbands, the empirical records show, from fundamentalist families is off the charts when compared to any other, say, liberal religion or sect or atheist.
Well, the dominionists are even beyond the fundamentalists. I mean, the fundamentalists, you know, they may be fanatical, but they don't think that they don't yet think they need to take over the government so that Jesus can sit on a throne.
Well, the dominionist
I think the
is
fundamentalists
ultimate.
still think Jesus can do whatever he wants. I don't know how Betsy DeVos and Eric Prince decided that they were powerful enough to make the conditions for Jesus to return, but I do know that it's a very noxious idea, and that you would have to be insane to actually devote your life to doing it. I don't know. I see her in these hearings, and she does not seem like someone who's connected to reality.
They believe they can wag the dog, so to speak.
Yeah, they think they can wag the Jesus from their money.
Exactly.
They got the money, they can make Jesus do what they want.
Steve, there was a billionaire in Texas that picked up, I don't know if he was a dominionist, he picked up the Bible and read a verse, I think in Isaiah, that said when there's a red calf born in Israel, that would be the generation that sees the return of the Messiah. It has to be a totally red calf.
Oh.
He spent millions of dollars flying livestock over the ocean to Israel, setting up breeding barns to bring forth the birth of a red calf.
Yeah, that's what
Now,
we're
to me,
talking
that's
about.
wagging the dog.
That's what they're talking about, right?
But here's the funny thing about it. They finally thought they had a red calf. I'm not making this up. I read a book, and it's absolutely been logged. They thought they had a red calf, and people from all over the world came to see in this manger, not to sound too Christian here, this little red calf. Buses were lined up down these little gravel roads out in the farmland of Israel. Then one day, they saw a little tuft of white hair growing on the calf's chest. So their theory was, well, we lost that chance. So back to the breeding, back to the absolute influence of biological control to try and bring about the return of the Lord. Now that sounds whimsical, but can we not extrapolate that to people who think if we just suddenly had control of, well, Department of Education. We don't need that. We'll have a panel of fundamentalists. run
Wow.
that.
Yeah.
They think the Lord is a step closer. They believe that. That's their epitome. That's what they want.
Yeah, no, it's not really comical. It's really appalling.
It is.
It's really appalling, and I've seen it in a broader sense where people want Israel to keep provoking the Muslim world because they think that by Israel continuing to provoke the Muslim world and the U.S. continuing to send weapons to Israel to provoke the Muslim world, that they can spark Armageddon, and then Jesus will have to come back, won't he?
Exactly.
Because if we start Armageddon, Jesus is got to come back.
They even have a verse that says something about when the old-time sacrifice is restored, where they would slaughter animals. So they have in detail the restoration of the uniform that these, I think, called the Order of Melchizedek, that they would go out into the square right now in Jerusalem, now the capital, thanks to Trump,
Right, thanks to Trump.
and slaughter animals, thinking, well, we've restored the sacrifice, and so we're going to bring about the end of the world. They get excited when you talk about cataclysm. When you talk about disaster, these fundamentalists and these dominionists get really excited.
Well, you know what? People watching right now, and I don't know why you're not calling. Did you put the phone number on the screen? Look, people work in the public schools. You know, there may be a nationwide movement of woke teachers fighting against this sort of thing and these curriculum. But here in Grand Rapids, people are like, oh, you know, the DeVosses are so nice. They put money into the public schools, you know. Oh, yeah, you'll see Betsy DeVos come in and she'll read to the students and everything, you know.
They fall for the stick.
So why is it Grand Rapids, which has been more affected by some of these policies than any other place so far? We have been their laboratory.
Yes, we
and
have.
that's why we know here that it doesn't work.
Right.
That the charter school system is a drain on public sources, that it undermines the public schools, that it puts corporations in power of curriculum, that it demoralizes teachers, that it creates charter schools that either don't even open, don't accept marginal students or challenged students, it leaves them to the public schools that pretends to be creating a better education, but is really just keeping public control out of public schools.
Exactly.
Removing public.
I think that's a very prescient question. When you ask why is it worse here in West Michigan, you'd think there'd be a pushback being the doorstep of Betsy DeVos.
Right.
Maybe the most unpopular secretary.
But
of
apparently
Ed in
we're
history.
used to it.
Well, that's exactly it. We've gone through generations of propaganda that have fallen on West Michigan. I mean, let's go back to the funeral of the patriarch DeVos just, what was it, a couple years ago?
Rich DeVos.
Yeah, it was as disgusting as the one I just went through with Bush Sr. I say that because I'll give you an example of the West Michigan propaganda machine. The museum just within view, I guess it's this direction from here. I took a group of journalism students down. Mm-hmm. We had been studying how the Ford administration, and now this has been proven, gave Indonesia the absolute right and authority and approval to attack a country called East Timor.
Yeah.
East Timor was much farther, I don't want to say it was a third world country. They had no weaponry. I don't think they had a standing army.
No.
So they...
No. It's an island in the between Malaysia and Australia.
Right.
Right.
With a very deep trench that we wanted for our submarines, for our nuclear submarines.
Right.
So in exchange for telling them, we'll give you the weaponry if you invade East Timor.
Yeah.
And we'll put the focus on what's going on with the Khmer Rouge, which was simultaneous.
Right.
And you can get away with murder. And they got away with murder.
Well, they not only got East Timor, but our president here and Kissinger and Ford gave Suharto the go-ahead to start a massive purge of socialists in Indonesia.
They did.
100,000 people were wiped out in a major
Amy Goodman's brother
massacre.
was hurt severely trying to cover that.
And so far, I think in East Timor, since the invasion of East Timor, it's been like 300,000 people. I mean, it's hard to believe, but
It is. But you go to the museum, and
won't be there.
the image that you get is there's a man who had to heal the nation. We'll just turn our back.
we had to
around.
heal the nation by pardoning Nixon, so we never got to the bottom of Watergate, which
Right.
is what we're going through again, by the way, folks.
So my students are hungry, and they asked some of the curators, some of the guides, is there anything in this entire building talking about the weapons that went to Indonesia? No. Is there anybody we can talk to about that? Do you have a spokesman? They knew nothing about it.
No, they don't.
And I bet you there's not 10 Grand Rapids citizens that know any more than what we've talked about right here about it. I'm just using that as a small segment of propaganda that just generation after generation.
Propaganda by
steeped on it.
omission.
Exactly.
Turns out the U.S. had its own involvement with the Khmer Rouge, too.
Oh, they certainly did. And the media discrepancy was gigantic. A guy named Noam Chomsky made a book called, or wrote a book.
He wrote a lot of books.
I can't remember what this one was, but he rolled out on the floor all of the articles in the Washington Post and New York Times about the Khmer Rouge genocide. And it was
Manufacturing consent.
Manufacturing consent, exactly.
The Noam Chomsky movie and Noam Chomsky book, definitely worth reading as all his books are. You know what? If they've succeeded in doing this, we've downloaded a clip from Brian Taylor Cohen where he gives some analysis of Betsy DeVos's recent congressional testimony. So can we run that clip now?
We can't make it.
Okay, we can't make it work. Well, anyway, if you've seen any of Betsy DeVos's recent congressional testimony, you will see that she doesn't want to answer any questions for sure. She gets answered a yes or no question, and she just talks about something else. Now, I don't know if she's pretending to be crazy, or if she's really crazy, or if this is her strategy to not have to answer any questions. But what has she done since we were here last talking about what she's been doing? She offered to cut the education department's budget by $7 billion. Now, she's cutting programs for special education and for race-targeted education because she seems to be saying that it is a waste of money. She says we need to put our money where it will do some good, and you just can't help these people. And she includes the mentally challenged in there with black people. The same being it's just not worth it for us to try to help these people because they're just so inferior. And she's a smart lady, I guess she would know. She went to Calvin College, and she also went to, what was this, Holland Christian High School. Her alma mater is being sued for allegedly mishandling students' sexual assault cases and compromising the complainant's safety. This happens to be the very Obama-era rule that Betsy DeVos is taking off. So she's taking off protections, especially for women and girls, but for anyone who's being sexually targeted on campuses, saying the schools don't have a responsibility for their students' safety. Well, then she says, but the school does have a responsibility for their safety, and she says that federal dollars can go to schools to buy guns for teachers because that'll make them safer. So she's cut for the Special Olympics, but then when that made a brouhaha, Trump came in and said that he was restoring funding. He didn't say he was restoring complete funding, and as far as I know, no funding's been restored.
That's right.
So you see this with all of Trump's cabinet. They go before Congress, they obfuscate, they go as far as you can without being proven to be lying, just by feigning ignorance or actually being ignorant. or insane, like Carson. And what you end up with is unaccountable power, because you can't, the people exercising the power refuse to answer questions, or they simply can't answer the questions. How can there be oversight of someone who is not mentally responsible?
Exactly. You know, I think people have to realize that this is not a coexistence that Betsy DeVos is proposing.
No.
This is like a cancer cell when you think about the private school industry in the midst of public schools. This is not something that finds a balance for survival. This, and we have the numbers to prove that. We're not going to be able to hold a chart up here. We have whole cities, New Orleans, Philadelphia for the most part. We have well, let's just take the numbers here in the state of Michigan. We're at about 17%. The students I'm talking about are charter school students, and that's a proliferation from just 4 or 5, I think 6 years ago. They're not going to stay static. They're going to eradicate public education.
Right.
But they'll never know it. The public will never know it, because charter schools can be called public, because the businessmen want public money. That's
Right.
all that's
Right,
public
right.
about. If anybody wants to know what's public about a charter school, the funding.
The money, right.
That's it. There's nothing else. To get into the charter school, it's not an open door. You and my community, you're welcome. They now, right here in Grand Rapids, many of the schools, the majority of the schools, have to have a test, a reading test, a math test, et cetera, so that if they want to reject a student, they can do that. That was not allowed legally for public schools.
Right.
And yet that building that puts an entrance exam is still called a public school. So you're not going to even know, like they've said, if the United States becomes a fascist state, it'd be what, somebody carrying a Bible wrapped in a flag or something like that.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's not that they'll ever announce, now we are a private school education system. They'll think, hey, we still have a public school system.
Because
When it's
the
like
public's
dry
paid,
rot with a boat.
the public's paid for it, but they're not having control over it anymore. You know, they begin with the word choice. It's going, oh, we're just making a choice so that you don't have to go to this lousy public school that we're underfunding. Just give us some of the money so that this is even more underfunded. We'll do what we want with it, steal it, or create programs that that indoctrinate students into their idea of what gender identity should be, for instance, or their idea of what American history should be, you know, a Lynn Cheney version of American history where George Washington was always right and his happy slaves loved him to death. That's the history they'll teach you, and when it's all done, the choice will be gone. Oh, what choice?
Right.
And the history you learned in school will be that the godly overcame the unrighteous once again.
You'll be taught that slaves came here because it was a natural migratory channel.
Oh yeah.
No, seriously, that's in
They
textbooks.
they were the original immigrants coming looking for work, as I've seen in recent textbooks approved to be taught in Texas.
You'll have no chapter on labor back in the back
No,
there
well,
between the Industrial Revolution and the Progressive. Those chapters will be gone. You won't see the word imperialism. Matter of fact, the Texas books industry right now today has made sure imperialism doesn't appear anymore in American history. And we're already seeing the effects of the corporate world controlling and running education in the United States. But there won't be a flag stuck on the hill anywhere that says now we are a private industry. They'll maintain
No.
and tell you that it's still public.
No, and when Eric Prince has succeeded in privatizing the war in Afghanistan, people won't think, well, eventually this will just turn into an oligarchy. You know, basically, we have becoming an oligarchy, but we can't see it because the oligarchy controls the means of even discussing the process. The liberal media and the conservative media agree in this, that America will never be a democratic socialist country.
Well, let's remember that when they asked Eric Prince on the stand, on the witness stand, and also some legislators, how much money has been given to the private contractor called Blackwater? There was no record of it. There's no real accurate accounting today of how many charter schools, how much money is being given to schools never open. There is no real rubric that anybody, any citizen can really study.
There'll be no accountability. You won't be able to find out.
No, absolutely not.
This is similar to the sort of looting of the treasury that's going on every level. Even with Trump in his penny-ante way, making the Secret Service rent his golf carts to follow him around the golf course.
Steve, I tell you, I remember in Blackwater where I think it was Eric's dad, and I can't remember his name now, or it was his granddad, driving a vegetable truck from Holland past Hudsonville towards Grand Rapids, died of a heart attack. Boom. Died instantly. And then, of course, Eric and Betsy's dad died at a young age as well, having made a visor that swept the nation after trying to make a ham deboner that would take bones out of hams and getting conservative money for his next experiment. Finally became a billionaire. I'm saying all that because on the soil here in West Michigan, we gave birth. We raised up at Holland Christian School. We raised up the champion for privatization. And right now, she's got a 44-0 lead on the 2-yard line, about to score again.
Wow.
And people have no real understanding of how severe and how close we are to the complete overthrow of the public school system. So I urge people, anybody listening, to get some of these books. Get Diane Ravitch's book called, I think it's called Reign of Air, or Air of Rain, I'm not sure. Anything that Ravitch talks about. She was an ex-Secretary of Ed who's completely turned on charter schools. Right here locally in Michigan, Mitchell Robinson is a writer from Michigan State University, the professor.
Yeah.
Has outstanding material, written a number of books against charter schools. A professor just south of us at Western Michigan University, Gary Myron, has tremendous compilation of statistics that show just how faulty charter schools are, how quickly they burn out, how fast the charter school teacher quits his job. The attrition rate is 10 times higher.
Oh, well, let's talk about charter schools as undermining the teachers' unions and undermining the standards that teachers have historically been meant to meet, so that charter schools can hire any old person without education, you know, and say, you're a teacher now because we don't want to pay you as much as we used to have to pay people who went, you know, I went through the education program at Aquinas, and you know, it was pretty rigorous beyond what your own major. To go into education to be able to teach in your major was a lot more work, and they were really strenuous. But they don't, even now, they haven't paid enough. This is just a way to pay less.
Right. And to weaken the teachers.
Right,
So
as
they
a
come to school
force.
tired, and then, you know, have monetary worries. Many of them are food stamps. I know because I was a teacher, taught with colleagues who depended on their existence for food stamps. They're stressed, they're pulled stretched thin, and then they get attacked on top of it because the conservative agenda wants to weaken the teacher union and also weaken the teacher. They want a guy you can bring in off the street, plug him into a manufactured curriculum that they have no creativity or thinking on their own. They just follow step 1, step 2, step 3, make the $35,000 a year, and that's where education is headed. You can drive, there's a billboard on 96 headed just by Portland out here. Want to be a teacher? Go to this website. No teaching experience. Like when I got my
No questions
certificate.
Asked.
Yeah, you just.
Don't worry, we'll tell you what to teach them.
There's a bill out there to let substitutes come in if they have a relative in a school. They don't have to have a teaching certificate.
Well, you know,
Here in Michigan.
substitute teachers don't need teaching certificates anymore.
No, they did at one time.
They did, yeah.
Yeah. Now all you have to have is a relative in said school, and you can go and sub in that
Well,
building.
even
if
without a
this bill
bachelor's
passes.
degree?
No, I don't think you even have if this goes through, the only prerequisite is that you know somebody. Imagine some of the ideologue, crusty old guys you're going to get in there. teaching kids.
Well, I guess then it really will be true that it doesn't matter what you know, it matters who you know. You know, we've got about 8 minutes left, really, and I want to talk about the revolt of teachers from West Virginia to LA that has been getting some success. Let's talk about that, but first let's take a break from the topic and talk about your radio program, Southpaws. Tell people when they can tune in to you and what they're likely to be tuning in for.
Yes, just go to Facebook radio show / Southpaws. We broadcast once a week. We're affiliated with Pacifica. We have almost 20 stations all over the country.
Oh, that's right. It's national now, but not in Grand Rapids anymore.
Not in Grand Rapids any longer. We ran into conservative buzzsaw, but we play 6 cities in California, Virginia, Ohio. But you can go on your computer and watch us there.
What have been some of your recent topics?
We just tackled the Assange arrest last week. Obviously, that was very topical.
Yeah.
And Assange to us represents the overthrow of journalism and the death of investigative journalism. We pointed out that nobody wanted to talk about the content of his releases. They just wanted to go against some person, kill the messenger, like Gary Webb.
Well, what do you say about a society where the criminals get to go on doing what they're doing, but the people who blow the whistle on the criminals have to go to prison? For instance, Chelsea Manning.
Right.
He's how we know that Eric Prince was hunting people from his helicopters.
Right, I showed that clip to my journalism class. Had the ROTC guy upstairs in my room. I showed this clip. He said, you don't know if that's factual. I said, this is an actual record, and I challenge you to prove to me that it's not absolute footage of us massacring 3 kids, 2 journalists, and what was it, 8 or 9 civilians, Iraqi civilians. That's what it is.
Right.
You're looking at an open border, but I hear him giggling about it. Where are you going to get that kind of disclosure?
I don't know.
Where are you going to get the fact that the U.S. Army has lied about the amount of casualties systematically in Iraq and in Afghanistan? The amount of civilians, that's triple what, and how they formulate a number that is not going to upset anybody.
Right, but they say that Julian Assange put lives in danger by publishing what he did, that he even had names and stuff in it. But they don't seem to mind endangering Ilhan Omar by calling her some sort of anti-American terrorist monster.
Right. Absolutely, it's the converse. When he rips up, or what was that picture where there's the Twin Tower, not the Twin Towers, but the 9/11 behind her, as if she somehow is responsible with Islamophobia. But we're looking today, Steve, and I love what you have with this show. We're looking at a challenge to getting any facts or figures out. We talked about charter schools here because that was our topic, but on Southpaws, we dig into things that just pretty much are untouched by the mainstream media.
Think there's any hope of getting Southpaws back on the air in Grand Rapids? Any stations that might be interested in picking up? You're being nationally syndicated by Pacifica, right?
Pacifica, right. Well, we'd like to think someday, and
Why not YCE?
Well, we could look into that. There's a thing called Twitch we just recently experimented with, and we're trying to get some. I have a face for radio, and Darren, we're kind of the same boat, but we got to keep up with the times. So yeah, we're going to expand, and we might look into some opportunity here.
I'm thinking, if you videotaped the radio program, you could also show it on GRTV. But you would have a video to put it onto streaming platforms like YouTube.
Right.
But anyway, let's talk about West Virginia. What did the teachers accomplish in West Virginia with their strike, besides just what they accomplished for themselves with a small pay raise and a promise of smaller classes?
Mainstream media does not want the public to know that the one issue that West Virginia went on strike for wasn't a small class size, more money, or any of those traditional demands. They, after winning meager pay raises, went back to work, and then about a month later said, no, we're going back on strike because we want the eradication of charter schools in West Virginia. They were trying to get 7 charter schools, and those teachers, without really any union support,
Wow.
single-handedly stopped that headwater movement, because 7 would have gone to 40 to 80 and onward.
Because apparently they could see what's happening in Michigan. They saw that a few charter schools were a wedge in that would mean the eventual eradication of the idea of public schools.
Right. But what that did, Steve, is it lit a
essence.
fire under a lot of progressives who had never tackled this issue, including Bernie. Bernie has never really said much about charter schools.
Yeah.
And they said, wait a minute, here's the rank and file, here's the grassroots teachers out there saying they know the danger to public schools, and so now that's pulled people into that movement, which is great. Same thing happened in California, where the so-called progressive candidates and leaders never talked about charter schools, but because of the groundswell, now they're being forced. And there's people coming out, there's even union leaders for the first time coming out and confronting charter schools.
You're watching Oh Say Can You See, the bi-monthly talk show of the Society for Economic Equality. I'm Stephen Durst. I've been talking with Jack Prince, a former teacher union official who has a program on Pacifica Radio, nationally syndicated, called Southpaws. I presume that refers to left-handedness.
Right.
And we have been discussing the disaster that is the Dominionist plan for America in the world and how it's playing out in Betsy DeVos's Department of Education, how it's playing out with her brother Eric Prince's private military, Blackwater, now called Z, or have they changed their name again?
Academia.
That's what they're called now?
Something to that flavor.
Oh.
It's totally misleading.
Yeah, really. Did I mention that Eric Prince has his new contract with the Chinese government to terrorize
How disgusting.
Uyghurs in South
Yeah.
and West China? So we have been discussing privatization. We've been discussing how philanthropy can be used for the social engineering purposes that go around the legitimate social programs that governments have created more or less democratically. This is the problem here. Public schools are a democratically controlled institution.
Have been.
So what DeVos, what the charter schools want to do is take the public money, use it for private purposes, and leave the public out of the decision
With no
making.
influence. With no influence.
And this is step one towards a bizarre plan they have to make the U.S. a Handmaid's Tale-like theocracy in which sexual deviancy will be suppressed, where in their bizarre belief, Jesus will actually come and sit on a throne and rule in America.
That's what they're headed for. That's what they believe.
Look into Jeremy Scahill's book, The Family. And what's the other book by Jeremy Scahill you were talking about that you had signed when he thought that you might be
that's
one
just
of
called
those
Blackwater.
princes?
Blackwater.
Blackwater. So,
Last few words?
good night and good luck.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you. I have a problem with everything, but the show's recorded it's recorded.
Oh, it's recorded, but we didn't go out. No wonder we didn't get any phone calls.
We can't get that to work anymore.
Oh, well, huh. I mean, we need some young blood around here who knows how to run these things. We're all like Luddites.
We
Yeah,
do
that-
have Frank. Frank knows more about the audio than the rest of us, plus Chris is here tonight.
Yeah.
And Chris is the guy that really knows what to do.
Yeah.
But
Well, I would have enjoyed that conversation if it hadn't been even recorded, just to.
Oh, yeah, it was a fun conversation. So
Really good.
it's more fun if you think you're being recorded.
well,
I guess we are recorded.